Hi, welcome to Chat. My name is Amanda Cumming, and today we are speaking with Venus Calida and William J. Jackson, both host and producer of the Black Pipe podcast on Wine Cellar Media. So welcome to the program, guys. It's nice to have you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, so let's just jump in. So first off, tell our viewers a little bit about yourselves.
All right, you got it.
All right. Well, we are a married couple. We podcast together. That is sort of our thing. That is our job. We're general leftists, dabble occasionally in activism, me more so than William. And our entire goal is to make the world a little more informed by promoting as much as we can as left type of ideas. That's who we are. That's what we do. And of course, we're Black. And we talk about racism a lot.
Okay. So it's kind of that, would that summarize your show pretty well, you think?
Well, there's a comedy aspect to it because something about it, like in trying to get folks informed, we got to make the horrific emotionally accessible. So there's got to be a lot of punchlines to it. We make sure that we do white on white crime stories where there are real stories, but we're making fun of white on white crime. And Becky Lives Matter stories, typically racist white women and white feminist stories that we make fun of in between the general horrific stories about societal ills and climate change and whatnot and garbage patches and everything that goes wrong. Yes. We put comedy in between.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of our stories that we try to cover are stories that don't necessarily hit mainstream news outlets. We talk a lot about LGBTQ issues, especially trans women issues. We talk a lot about sex workers' rights, particularly with misogyny. We talk about corrupt police a lot. So we talk about the things that a lot of mainstream outlets don't really want to talk about.
Yeah.
Great. That sounds like a fantastic show to watch. On all the shows that you've done, do you guys have kind of a most memorable show or maybe even a good starting point for our viewers to just jump in to watch anything from you guys?
I do specifically title the episodes. There's one titled The Most Tangential Episode We've Ever Done.
Yes.
Right. A Christian mom listens to a rap song. That's a pretty good happened.
One. I think we had one that was we did so many things we couldn't even come up with a theme, so I think it was actually titled just Everything You Expect from the Wine Cellar
is in this episode. Yeah. Yes. that's the title. A very recent one we did that's like still climbing in downloads. It's almost a week old and it's titled This Is Why We Need to Kill a Lot of People.
Yeah.
And it's a pretty dope episode.
Yeah.
This is why what?
This is why we need to kill a lot of people.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just making sure that I heard that right. Yeah. I have not seen that episode, so I'm writing these down for myself as well.
And I mean, it's also difficult to try to pick a favorite one because at this point we have like 600 episodes in.
Yeah.
So it's kind of reached a point where it's difficult to be like, well, this one was better than this one or that one because there's just so much happening.
So what kind of got you guys interested in doing this?
I was already doing it. I'd always been creating content. Even as a teenager, I had a karaoke machine, and the same thing we do with podcasts. I would just make long cassette tapes of just raps, goofing around, any type of performance. Make copies, sell them in middle school and high school, and then burn CDs came along, so kept doing the same thing. And then I would enter rap battles, and I got invited to KPLU, Pacific Lutheran University, and I did college radio for a couple of years. And then I found a website called SoundClick going into 2001 and 2, so I sold tracks on there for a while. And then I got this device in 2010 called an iPod Touch, and someone said, you can listen to podcasts. So I looked that up, and I listened to a few, and I said, I can do that. And so I started doing that in 2012. And then Phoenix Calida tuned in live to a Sunday episode in 2014. Yeah. And I got notifications while I'm live, and she was quoting what I was saying. So I was like, hey, what's your deal? And we started riffing and talking. And then she came on as a guest several times. And then she kept calling in regularly to where I was like, well, why don't you just host, and she started doing show prep and hosting.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of how you got involved with Phoenix.
Yes. Yeah, that's how I got, because otherwise I would not have done it. But he was like, no, really, it's a good idea. So I'm like, all right, we'll try it. And now here we are.
Yes.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to something a bit more serious, kind of talking about stories that aren't really getting much attention right now. One being what's going on in LA and the homelessness there.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys have had an opportunity to read any of the material or anything that you've seen or anything that has come out lately. I think they implemented a new law recently saying that if people were caught sleeping in their vehicles, they would have them towed and basically impound their vehicles so they wouldn't be able to get access to them. And of course, that costs money to have to get out, and so their vehicle's gone. So I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on this issue.
Well, I mean, my first thought is that this is something that is being promoted, because I actually looked at what, the mayor's office and what legislators are saying, and they're saying that this is a good way to get homeless people into safe places where they need to be, right? Because apparently it's safer to sleep on a tent on a street corner than it is to sleep inside a locked vehicle somehow. And it seems to be really a money-making thing, and it just seems to be one of those laws that basically criminalizes being homeless without actually criminalizing being homeless. Like, that's what this appears to be, and it's just really depressing to know that this is the kind of thing that can be passed, and they're like, well, we're doing it for the good of the community, and it's like, but how is the community being made better by having their possessions taken or having their vehicles taken? And then, shelters fill up. They run out of beds. There's reasons you can't qualify for a bed. So the folks who can't get into an appropriate shelter and still don't have access to their cars are just going to be on the streets, and they're a high risk for anything from police violence to street violence to potential sexual assault to being a victim of the elements, when the weather gets bad. I mean, the whole thing is just horrific, and it's really just another way to say fuck you to poor people, quite honestly.
Yeah. So, or even people that are making a decision where it's like, I'm in a transitional period, quite literally. So I've lived in the city. I lived in Orlando for 12 years, and I've seen folks like that where it's like, no, I need to I can get another apartment after I work some overtime and save up some checks, and I'm just going to have to sleep in my car, and I have a free 30-day gym membership, and I can shower at the gym, and then I can go ahead and move into this apartment. And this is how you don't have freedom under capitalism, because something else you look at out there is like skyrocketing rent to where you have to have a roommate, even if you're several dollars above minimum wage. And this will force you to have to go and pay that rent to that landlord, which is supposed to be a free market, free of landlords, but here we are. And so you have to go pay that rent now. Like they're criminalizing you being able to have a transitional period into something that you can afford. So pile up, get some roommates, go do it. Right. Or the other side of it, get arrested, go to jail. But either way, you're going to benefit the ownership class with your existence. And
another problem that comes in with that too is suddenly being forced to go into a lease with somebody. If you end up in an abusive situation, somebody's being harmful to you and you can't leave because you have a lease and you can't afford to break your lease. So there's a lot of ways that this kind of thing puts people in severe danger. Yeah,
particularly like cis hetero, like how that affects women, where now you're locked into this abusive relationship because this roommate / boyfriend is what you're stuck with this slumlord landlord in a lease.
Yeah.
Hang in there.
No, that's okay.
Yeah, I don't know how it is in LA, but I know that there's a specific law here targeting basically how many roommates you're allowed to have. And so in some of these, I live in Nashville, and you're not allowed to have multiple roommates depending on like how many bedrooms are in a unit. And so it definitely restricts, it kind of favors towards couples, obviously, but it only kind of assumes that everything is coupled. And so beyond that, it's like outside of a dormitory room, you're basically restricted and you can't get roommates. It's actually very difficult to do.
Required.
So,
Yes.
so it just seems like another way to target people that maybe aren't in relationships, that are single or anything like that. That I guess in this kind of Christian nation, you shouldn't really be. If you're going to be living with someone, it should be your husband or wife or partner, if any way. So it just seems like there's some kind of weird capitalism, Christianity kind of motif going on, at least in the South where I'm located.
Oh no, I think that's all over, because there have been studies done where landlords do show preferential treatment to people who are in a romantic relationship versus people who are roommates, because it's assumed like, oh, I can just get into a fight with one of my friends and want to break the lease and leave or whatever. But for some reason, couples don't do that, apparently. I don't know. But that's the assumption, is that if you're in a romantic relationship, you're more stable, you're more serious, you're going to be more mature, so you're going to be better renters. So yeah, there is definitely that preference. And then you might be in a situation you can't get out of, or you might be disadvantaged and not be allowed to rent because you're not in a romantic relationship like that. Like, the whole thing is just, it's too much.
Yeah, and not to mention that we're talking about, spousal abuse and basically people that can't get out of relationships. So populations that are at risk are any type of, any person that could be considered, I guess, going through any type of abusive relationships. You've got people like veterans, you've got people with mental illness. And so again, it's almost like not only are they at risk for homelessness, or they are homeless, but then they qualify for all these underserved populations with very little advocacy to be able to kind of break this law or get people to actually vote against something like this.
Right.
It's awful. Society sucks sometimes.
Society does suck. Definitely set up to penalize people who aren't respectable enough, aren't rich enough, and all those things. And I wish that there was like a level of honesty about it. Like, just admit that this is because you hate poor people or because you hate homeless people. Don't pretend that this is for their benefit. We covered a story on the podcast a few weeks ago from Chicago where, winter gets really, really cold up here, really cold. And a man was letting homeless folks sleep in his basement, and the city came and shut him down and said that they were going to evict him because it was unsafe for the homeless people, because apparently Chicago streets, when it's negative 15 degrees outside, is a safer place for homeless people than a furnished basement with heat. Who knew? Yeah,
it's safe. They got cones.
Right.
There's curbs.
Yeah, the curb is safe.
There's street light here and there, maybe a receptacle, little garbage can.
Broken glass, rats, police.
That's broken glass. You can make art with that. You get some Elmer's glue. You can make something. Be productive, right?
Speaking of kind of, again, penalizing these people, and you mentioned like hating the poor. Why do you think there's such a contempt towards poor people in our society?
I think that the way our society is set up, we have this like Protestant work ethic, we have the capitalism, and there's this sort of underlying theory that life is mostly fair, and that if you bootstrap hard enough and you show up and you do everything you're supposed to do, you're going to be rewarded. You're going to end up in a good place. And so poor people are the exception to this. So in order to justify all the other oppressive systems that we have, right? So this is reinforcing patriarchy. This is reinforcing classism, ableism, all these things. You have to villainize poor people. You have to demonize them, because if they actually made the right choices and life was just really unfair, everything else starts to crumble, right? It has to somehow be their fault that they're homeless. It has to be their fault that they're poor. They, made a bad decision, or they made a bad life choice, and that's how they ended up there. Because if we were to acknowledge that systems were intentionally stacked against people, yeah, the ownership class would not appreciate that. People who don't want their delusions shaken would not appreciate that. It's just much easier to pretend that life is pretty much fair, and if you're homeless, you messed up somehow, as opposed to the system is messed up and designed to make people fail. Like it's about that cognitive dissonance and that comfort, really.
One thing that hit a note to me right as you were speaking was you said that it's kind of reinforcing this patriarchy. Could you kind of describe that a little bit?
Well, sure. So the idea is that under patriarchy, right, it's very much, it's a mixture of Christian values of which, a male should be leading the household, a male should be leading the workplace. It's women's jobs to stay home and raise kids and do that sort of thing. But then it's also tied into this like Protestant capitalism thing that we have, particularly in the United States, where if you're a good person, God will bless you, right? So you have all these like weird little forms of Christianity coming together to reinforce patriarchy. And so part of being a good patriarch means you can support your family. So if you have a household where you can't adequately support your family, you're failing. If you are not in a heterosexual relationship, you're failing. If your relationship has gone wrong, you've somehow failed. And I think that's really evident with how we view, in particular, like single mothers and homeless women. It's very, very difficult for them to find resources because there's this underlying assumption that you did something to ruin your relationship. Like, what did you do to that man, that poor man? You must have ruined it somehow, and so people be stingy when it comes to resources for women and girls in that aspect. And then there's also very little sympathy for men who get abused by this system because not everybody can succeed under the system. That's why it was made. That's how it was made. It was made knowing if everybody succeeds, there's not enough resources for the top to hoard, right? So not everybody can make it. And even when the men fail, it's like, well, it's your fault. You failed at being a man. It's your fault. And so it's just reinforcing this really, really toxic concept of patriarchy and these really rigid gender roles, even though we know going into them, people are going to fail. But we do it anyway,
Right. Like the system was definitely designed to have people to fail. It needs those people because it's not only about holding resources, it's also about assuring that you have an underclass because those are the people that are going to continue to work to help, basically perpetuate a system that benefits the 1% or the elite or the ruling class.
Yeah, this fails when the poor person gets some bologna with their breadcrumbs. That's when the system fails.
Well, the system eventually will crumble on itself when there's no more wealth to funnel up to the top.
Yeah, or water.
See, I did have a question, but now I don't remember what it was. So what are your thoughts about the fact that it's estimated that there are at least, I guess, 5 homes for each person that's homeless, vacant homes. Is that just a remarkable statistic to you, or isn't that just to make you like infuriated with the system that we have in place?
It's bigger than homes.
Yeah, right? It is not remarkable to me. It is not surprising to me. It's absolutely infuriating, but it is the logical conclusion of the system that we have, where the goal is to hoard as much as you can. Not because you need it, not because you want it, not because you have a use for it, but simply so that somebody else can't have it, right? Like this system we have is the ultimate, I'm not using that toy, but I refuse to give it to charity because it's mine, damn it. And that is the system that we have. And so it makes sense that people are hoarding. And I think that, like, in this discussion, a lot of times what's not really like elaborated on is how far the inequality goes as far as economic redistribution. I don't think poor people really understand how much money like the top 5% has, right? Like, yeah, we see their cars, or we see, their vacation home. Like, we see, Mango Mussolini's Mar-a-Lago, right? Like we see it, but we don't really get it, right? Like these are people who can lose $1 million in the stock market and still be okay. Right. There are people who can buy a yacht on a whim. And it's, I don't think that we oftentimes examine how close lower class or working class is to middle class, but how far middle class is from upper class. And I think that has a lot to do with the conversation. People just don't realize how far apart the numbers are,
Yeah, Yeah, and I've riffed about this for like somewhere in like the past 10 to 13 weeks. In 2011, I got a bicycle and stopped driving to and from work and whatnot. And I'm in Orlando back then, and I see, you know, homeless folks a lot in that city. And there was a hostess shop, little like outlet shop for stuff that people didn't buy from the big box stores, and it just went there and went for, you know, much lower prices. And it and it went out of business and it shut down. But you can look in the window, you can still see lights on. There's still electricity running through there. I'm sure there is still water running through there. So that's a building. Like whether it's the abstract thought of what we call a home or not, it's a building, right? There's a toilet in there. There's a sink, like running water, hot, cold, electricity. And you can look right in the window. There's still bread in there. Debbie snacks or whatever. Not very healthy, but Jesus Christ, you're not hungry if you eat one. But no, homeless person literally sleeping on the curb outside of a building with electricity and running water and a toilet that works. Probably toilet paper in the damn thing too. And maybe even some hand soap. You know, they could wash their face or whatnot, whatever they got to do. It's buildings, right? Like we've riffed about this before, like our little like dream community. Like we could take one of these old shopping malls that's vacant now. And my goodness, that could be like an apartment building. Take all those stores and turn those into little apartments. You know, the shopping mall area, community area. There's toys and whatnot in there already. There's multiple kitchens considering the food court, and like it's buildings, right? Not just what we call homes and houses, but buildings, structures in general that are usable. And people are homeless.
And those structures, especially with a mall, for example, that's already set up to be a community, if you think about it. Because like you said, there are kitchens there, there are toilets there are a lot of room, there's a lot of spaces, there's closets, there's so much stuff that could be utilized instead of just standing there abandoned. There's a mall here that's abandoned currently. But of course, it's all locked up, but it still has electricity. When I've driven by and lights are on, it looks like you could just go in and go shopping still, outside of, you know, kind of the weeds getting overgrown. I mean, it's still great to be utilized for something or somebody. And I think it's just a failure of society when we don't serve the people that need to be served the most. Absolutely. It's not a failure of them. What were you going to say?
I'm sorry. I was going to say, I just, you know, to add on to that, I think that I kind of had one of those awareness moments. I had a friend who worked at the John G. Shedd Aquarium in Chicago, which is one of the largest aquariums in the country. And because it was nice and they had the dolphins trained to do these tricks and things, people would get married there. People would pay like this ridiculous fee of several $1,000 to have dolphins jumping while they were saying their wedding vows. They would have corporate events there, and it was on a museum campus. So there was also the Natural History Museum, and you know, Chicago really has great museums, and there's all these events, and they're catered, right? That's the thing. So these corporate events are catered. These weddings are catered. They had mitzvahs. They had quinceañeras catered. And at the end of the day, the food went in the garbage because they weren't allowed to give it to shelters. And it's like you're throwing away, literally chefs, people who went to culinary school are here making this food and we're throwing it away because we can't give it to hungry people. Like we could have fed that entire area's homeless community, but we didn't, because that is how we waste resources under this system. This is how we waste resources under capitalism. It's better to let something go to rot than to let it go to someone who needs it, not wants it, but needs it.
Okay. This is an infuriating topic for a lot of people, I'm sure, because it's just like there are so many solutions, yet they're not getting implemented because for some reason the powers that be just don't want them to be implemented. I think that there's something interesting. Is it just I guess I'm going to pass this question off to you guys, but do you think it's something about human nature that needs to have things and have the have-nots as well in a society? Because if you look at small-scale societies, or if you look at kind of our archaeological history, you'll note that they did take care of their elderly they did take care of their wounded and assured that they got fed and that they didn't go homeless and die prematurely as much as they could. I mean, you see injuries on, leg injuries where it's completely severed, yet they lived to a very old age, and you could tell that leg injury was maybe in their youth. So somebody had to take care of that person. Do you think that, given that, do you think it's maybe once a society gets too big that we just stop taking care of individuals, or do you think that it's something more ingrained? Is it? I'm going to pass this off to you guys as far as like, what's your opinion on that?
I don't think our current system is natural to humanity at all. I think it goes very much against humanity. Human nature is sort of by default a group thing, right? You want to be in the group for safety, for security. And as you've heard, a lot of our past history has been much more willing to share resources rather than hoard resources. Again, I point back to this Protestant Christian work ethic, which is a relatively new phenomenon considering the history of the world, and I think it was particularly rooted well in America because it was this idea America was the land of opportunity and anybody could come here and be something. But if you failed, it was because God didn't like you, or it was because you were lazy. It was because you had a mental illness, or, you were somehow cursed in some way. So once it became easy to demonize people who didn't succeed, that allowed all sorts of stereotypes and prejudices to come forward. And then, it also becomes a thing that is intentionally, in my opinion, it's very intentionally reinforced by, I would say, like the ruling class, right? Like the people in charge. And it's like a scarcity mentality. The idea, the best way to keep poor people poor is to convince them that there's a limited amount of resources, so they have to fight each other for everything. You have to scrap somebody to get your next meal. You have to fight, this person's willing to work 8 hours. You have to be willing to work 10 hours to make sure you get the job. This person will, skip one break. You got to skip all your breaks. You always have to do more in a way that hurts you in order to prove that you're more deserving than the next person so that you can get more scraps than the next person. But at the end of the day, we don't have to have people eating scraps. We're throwing away, we're throwing away millions of pounds of food a year. Nobody should be fighting for scraps. There's enough to go around. But if we really considered it in that perspective, there is a house for every homeless person. There is three meals a day for every hungry person. There is adequate medical care for everyone who needs it, for every sick person. Then everything would start to change, and that would change the ultimate structure and the power structures that we have. And that's just something that, the ruling class doesn't want. They want to keep their underclass where it is, and letting them know that it doesn't have to be this way is the best way for them to lose power. So they definitely reinforce this idea that, they dangle the bootstraps. If you just work a little bit harder than the next guy, you can be one of us too. And it's like, the only time you're going to be around a 1%er is maybe if you happen to be buried in the same graveyard. Like, they're not going to let you in,
That false scarcity, right? It makes me think of like some years ago, before I came to Illinois, and like, well, whenever I'm talking to a young person, I'm in Florida, so I'm surrounded by these little college boy libertarians. And it's like, I know what language to use and what not to use, and I can flip their minds. It's real easy. One thing I'd start with is what I call the chair argument. And I say, we never need to make another chair again. You know that, right? Chairs don't need to exist. It's that typical mindless busy work that the capitalist class has us doing just to keep our focus off of how we've got a foot in our behind. But we never need to make another chair again. Look at all the chairs in this restaurant, in this city. Go inside of a school. Chairs, desks, couches, everywhere, stools. You never need to make another chair again. Then there's chairs in the store that haven't been sold yet. There are chairs on the truck and transport going to the store. There are chairs in the warehouse that aren't on the truck yet. Like, there's chairs that aren't even on market yet. We don't need any more chairs, right? We went to a yard sale and got these 2 computer chairs for $3 each. We didn't need to get brand new chairs. Chairs already exist. And when the chairs break down, get a hammer, get some nails, and repair them, right? So like, we don't need to make all these new things as false scarcity, like you said, with homes and food.
Yeah. Well, it's just, that is capitalism in a nutshell, isn't it? It's constant growth for the sake of profit, not for the sake of necessity, not for the sake of making the world a better place. It's profit for the sake of profit. And you can't stop growing. You can't stop making. You can't stop producing. But you also can't equitably share either.
Well, if you are in a capitalist system like we are, if you aren't producing, then you're worthless.
Right.
And so somebody has to make the chairs and they can't stop. Otherwise, they are thrown out on the streets and then we're back at homelessness, right? So what would you recommend, say, something that our viewers can do or we can all do to kind of get the message out to people? I guess you guys are doing it with your podcast, but say something like our viewers that maybe, how do they start this discourse with other people to tell, kind of like you said, William, flip their minds?
Yeah, like words you avoid, like how we casually say capitalism a lot. I barely ever say socialism because that's one of those words that's really become a victim of colloquialism. Mm-hmm. But avoid those words and just talk about the facts head on, mm-hmm. right? And then just be like, it does not make any sense, right? Like some weeks ago, like I tend to work pretty heavy 12-hour shifts. I try to hit 60 hours a week because I'm poor. And I was covering part of third shift going into first shift, and a machine broke down. So I'm kind of just posted up with a young man from the city, and we're out here in the suburbs. And I point over to a machine and I'm like, they're almost done building that. You know what that does? That machine folds boxes that go right onto this assembly line. And that could be a person there. That's a $10 an hour job for a person to fold those boxes, but they'd rather spend $50,000 to make that machine because they're going to get that money back in less than a year and then build profit on it. You see, so that's how they're eliminating jobs. And then that person has to go find another job, probably for a lower wage. Now, that's not right, right? The ownership class shouldn't be doing that to us. And then I'll never forget the exact quote. He kind of scratched his chin and he said, that make a lot of sense when you say it like that, bruh. And I was like, yeah, just say it plain, mm-hmm. and it'll make a lot of sense when you say it like that, bruh.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Don't use the buzzwords unless somebody is completely familiar with them. A lot of people aren't. And even the buzzwords they think they know, they generally have in a negative context or not an accurate context. So just stay away from the buzzwords when you have the conversation. But then also ask people, but how does this affect you? Or ask people, do you remember when? Do you remember when garbage trucks used to have 2 people on them? Mm-hmm. What happened to half of those garbage truck drivers? What do you think they're doing right now? Right? Or, I don't know, man. So the CEO of McDonald's, he makes $9,000 an hour. I don't know. I mean, can anybody really do anything worth $9,000 an hour? I mean, I don't know. Can we? And just start asking questions, and don't be afraid to ask people, what's the long term of this for you? Because a lot of people get caught up in the immediate of, well, I'm okay right now, so I'm okay. And it's like, but will you be okay if your job gets outsourced? I mean, a lot of coal miners thought they were okay in 1981, and we see how that turned out. So yeah, ask the questions. Ask a lot of questions of, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Did you know this? Did you know that? And I think that despite my issues with the right, of which there are many, when it comes to class issues, more often than not, they have an underlying left point of view, just simply in the idea of fair trade, fair wages, that sort of thing, except that they have bought into right-wing propaganda saying, people who make minimum wage are lazy, or people who, are poor aren't working hard enough, or, we're just temporarily embarrassed millionaires. We can get our come up any day now. And that's the thing that you got to work around, because ultimately they understand when they're being screwed by rich people, but you just can't frame it as I'm a socialist or I'm a communist, because then they completely shut it out. But, ask fucking questions. Be like, do you think your boss should make $9,000 an hour while you make $7,000? I mean, do you think it's fair that Walmart gets food stamp money and they don't have to pay all their taxes?
And then they do a canned food drive for Thanksgiving for their employees. Hey, nigga, you got cans in your motherfucking store. And Yeah, and keep it casual. You don't have to get on a soapbox to make a speech, right? Like it's a conversation. You're riffing back and forth with someone, right? You're not speechifying, not poking a finger in their chest and let me tell you another thing about the something. And just keep it casual. It's a person-to-person interaction. Yeah. And you know, and look for like the language and things. Like somebody was trying to argue with us, right? And one of the things he said, I forgot about it because I didn't have much time. I was in between shifts and breaks, and he was like, well, I mean, that's why they're called entry-level jobs. And it's like, whoa. That's not why they're called entry-level jobs, is so they can be paid low. They're called entry-level jobs because the owner felt like calling it that. It doesn't have to be called an entry-level job. It's just a job. Yep. Right? Like you could make another job lower than that of just sweeping the parking lot. Like sweeping the parking lot produces less product than flipping the burger or doing the French fry or running to the drive-through. So like we can make entry-level job and we can get meticulous about it and go lower and lower and lower to somebody that just comes and prunes the tree and the bush in the morning for 2 hours. Like, so no, it's not entry-level job. It's just a job.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there is a solution for when all the jobs become automated or the majority of the jobs become automated. Because at some point they will be. Even I'm a statistician, and that's something that, you know, a computer could do quite easily. I use a computer to do it. So I'm just like, any day now they're going to have my job replaced with a computer. I had to get a graduate degree for that. So I'm going to be out of the job at some point. A lot of people will be. Do you guys see a solution to this?
My solution to automation. What?
Nah, you go for it. Nah, because if you recommend people listen to our podcast, they're going to hear our solutions are a little hardcore and somewhat unrealistic unless people get on board.
You can't do that. You can't say that. I think that the most realistic expectation would be a universal basic income. Like, honestly, I don't see a way to get around that, because if you take away the jobs, you take away the food. I mean, we're already in a crisis state. I believe it's like 1 in 5 kids is in a food insecure household. Millions of Americans are, you know, below the poverty line or right around the poverty line. Like, we are already at a crisis state. Making that worse simply so that we don't kill them all, the ruling class will have to do something. And that's either going to be killing us or pacifying us in some way. And I strongly suspect that universal basic income is going to be one of those things that comes along. But I do think that it's, you know, also depressing to think about automation only in terms of we do have machines that can do all these jobs, and yet we're still going to make people suffer. Like, we literally don't even have to work, but we're still going to be assholes to other people. So that's, yeah.
Yeah, well, it'll be hard to kill the ruling class because for the most part, we don't know who they are, right? Like, we know the Koch brothers' names. That's 2 guys, right? Like, there's way more on a global scale. There's way more of them than that. And I think that's why, you know, they're government gun monkeys, as I call them, you know, military, police, government gun monkeys. That's why they get paid a little more. They're made comfortable so that they will not be on the side of the people that may revolt if that ever happens. And they've got all the weapons. And I tell you, that revolt will get shut down real quick. Things like Ferguson are examples, small scale examples.
Yeah.
They did in their yards. Got shot. They stood in their yards because homeboy got shot. What do you think they're going to do if you actually stand up and they know your intent is to take down the capitalist system? Right. Yeah, those drone strikes will be a domestic situation, if you will.
It's going to be the move bombing everywhere.
There's already a precedent for drone strikes actually killing American citizens without due process. So it's already there. It's just a matter of time, I guess, for it to actually occur on the mainland, on American soil. And that's depressing and frightening to think of. So, I mean, the solution is either kill us or placate us, and they're probably going to have to placate us with a UBI or something along those lines.
Well, they'll placate us after they kill a bunch of us, and then they realize it's just too much. It's just not fair to the profit margin. So they're like, fine, you fucking peasants, eat. That's what it's be.
Bread and circus.
Mm.
Do you guys have a YouTube channel?
We have like 3 videos on it, and yeah, it's the same thing as us, the Black Podcast with Wine Cellar Media. You find it right there, same logo. Yeah, you'll find it easy. I just uploaded a little rap I did, a Becky Lives Matter rap. It said that story you may have noticed it. Now she's 19 years old, the white woman that told the story that said 3 black guys raped me behind the church. And she said it because she ripped her own jeans and she didn't want her mother to yell at her. And then
she thought her boyfriend was going to break up with her.
Yeah, she was found guilty, but all she's going to get for it, instead of the 30 years that she was originally facing for that, she's going to get, I think it was community surveillance for a little while. And then her record will be clean from employers and potential renters.
Interesting.
Yeah,
so we can include their YouTube channel on the link below as well. But anyways, so we were speaking with Phoenix and William today, and you can find their show at winecellarmedia.com. We'll include the link in the description below, and they also have their own YouTube channel that we will also include in the link below. So thank you guys so much for speaking with me today. I really appreciate it, and I wish you the best.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, have a good one.
You too.